Welcome to CalRecycle's recorded training on the SB 1383 facility requirements. This video is going to cover a range of topics, some of which have been covered in previous CalRecycle trainings, as well as covering some new content, including a discussion of the record keeping and reporting requirements for transfer processors, composters, and in-vessel digesters. You can skip over parts of this training that you don't need to review, and you can move straight to the content you would like to watch by forwarding the video using the timestamps below. I'm going to have my video on for a majority of this training, as well as my colleague Marcus, who will be doing about half of the training today, but you might see the video jump around in order to make the screen clear if there's something that I don't want the video to cover. With that, let's move on ahead. This training is split into 7 sections or parts. In part 1, we'll do a high-level overview of the facility requirements and why measurements need to be taken, how this reaches SB 1383's goals. In part 2, there will be a review of the new transfer processor measurement requirements and how to classify incoming streams of waste to the transfer processing facility. In part 3, it will be a review of the new transfer processor requirements for record keeping and reporting. And then in part 4, a detailed scenario of a fictional transfer processor facility that takes us from determining how to classify incoming streams, what streams are being received at that facility, all the way to what needs to be entered into the CalRecycle RDRS reporting system. Then in part 5, we'll have a detailed overview of the incompatible materials limit and how to calculate it. And then in part 6 and 7, we're getting into compost and in-vessel digesters. So part 6 will be a review of the new requirements for compost and in-vessel digestion operations and facilities, and what material must be measured at those facilities. And in part 7, we'll end with a review of the new requirements for record keeping and reporting for compost and in-vessel digestion. So with this slide, we're beginning part 1 of the training. In this section, we're going to take a step back so we can better understand why these regulations are in place and what entities are required to take measurements. So what facilities are required to take measurements under the new regulations? That is transfer processors, compost operations and facilities, and in-vessel digester operations and facilities. Are there any exceptions to these 3 broad categories? Yes. For transfer processors, recycling centers that pass the 3-part test are excluded from the measurement requirements. For in-vessel digesters, those IVDs that are not permitted solid waste activities, like most IVDs at a publicly owned treatment works, which are commonly known as wastewater treatment facilities, are excluded from the new requirements as well. Keep in mind that these new facility requirements under 1383 are for permitted solid waste activities only. And then for compost facilities and operations, there are no general exceptions. Note that a chip and grind is usually either permitted as a composter or it could be permitted as a transfer processor. So you would need to comply with the requirements of whatever facility type that chip and grind is permitted as. So now that we've established what types of permitted facilities need to comply with the new requirements, we're going to discuss what those requirements are as well as their purpose. For transfer processors, the main objective of the new requirements is to determine 1, the amount of organics recovered by the facility, and 2, the amount of organics disposed by the facility. To do this, the facility needs to calculate the organic recovery rate, and they do that by performing measurements on source separated organic waste streams, SSO, and mixed waste organic streams, MO. So how do we go about determining that percentage of organic recovery rate? We do that by using the sampling data that is submitted quarterly by the facility. 2 pieces of data primarily are submitted. 1, the amount of organic material sent for further processing, recovery, and end use, and 2, the amount of organics and material sent to disposal. Using that data, CalRecycle will then determine whether a facility is a high diversion organic waste processing facility based on the last 4 quarters of their recovery rate, that percentage recovery. And this is for facilities that receive mixed organic streams only, that MO. If a transfer processor does not receive an MO stream, then CalRecycle will not make this determination, as it only applies to transfer processors receiving MO waste. For a transfer processor to be considered a high diversion facility, the annual recovery efficiency must be 50% on and after January 1st, 2022, and 75% on and after January 1st, 2025. This recovery efficiency is a rolling average based on the last 4 quarters of measurement data that's submitted to CalRecycle. That number is telling us the percentage of organic material recovered over all the available organic material that came into that facility. If the transfer processor's annual recovery efficiency is below the threshold outlined in yellow and that I just described, and they are not, therefore, a high diversion facility, then this will have implications for where jurisdictions can send their MO waste. MO, mixed waste organics, can only be sent to a high diversion facility. CalRecycle plans to release a list of high diversion facilities or facilities that meet this threshold once we've received 4 quarters of data. CalRecycle will make a similar determination for transfer processors that handle SSO, source separated organic waste, except that a facility that meets the SSO recovery efficiency threshold will be called a designated source separated organic waste facility. If the recovery efficiency at that facility is lower than the threshold, again outlined in yellow on this slide, for 2 consecutive reporting periods, or for 3 reporting periods within 3 years, that facility will not be considered a designated SSO facility. The threshold is the same as it is for a high diversion, 50% on and after January 1st, 2022, and 75% on and after January 1st, 2025. Whether or not a facility that handles SSO streams is a designated SSO facility or not is relevant only to jurisdictions that have chosen the performance-based collection service option. These jurisdictions can only send SSO to transfer processors that are designated facilities. At the time of this recording, it is our understanding that all jurisdictions are currently using the standard-based collection service option, not the performance-based collection service option. Therefore, this is likely not an issue for most California jurisdictions and facilities at this time, meeting this benchmark for the recovery of SSO streams. It's important to remember a high diversion organic waste processing facility is a facility that meets or exceeds an annual average recovery efficiency of 50% or 75% in 2025, based on the sums of the outgoing weights of organics recovered and disposed from the MO stream only. Facilities that only receive SSO, CalRecycle won't be evaluating or trying to determine if these facilities are high diversion organic waste, as that only applies to facilities that handle MO. There are a few more requirements for transfer processors I want to mention in part 1. If a transfer processor has too much incompatible material, that would be over 20% in their SSO and MO streams, then they are limited in where they can send organic material for further processing, recovery, or end use. An example of this, a further description, and a run through of this calculation is going to be shown in part 5 of this training. For another requirement, transfer processors must measure the gray container waste stream to see how much organic material is left in the trash. We're going to be going over how to determine if a stream is gray container or when a stream is considered gray container in part 2 of this training. So what are the requirements for compost and in-vessel digestion activities? For these facilities and operations, the new requirement is to determine the amount of organic material that is being disposed of from these activities. These facilities are not required to perform any measurements on material sent for further processing, recovery, or end use. This means no measurements on finished compost, biogas, mulch products, or material sent to a transfer processor. The only measurement made at these facilities is on material destined for disposal, and we're trying to find out how much organic material is present in that material destined for disposal. For compost operations and facilities, CalRecycle will be determining whether the composter is a designated source-separated organic waste facility. Yes, this is the same term as the one we just used for transfer processors who handle source-separated organics, SSO. For composters, the threshold is less than 20% organics and materials sent to disposal on and after January 1st, 2022, and less than 10% organics and materials sent to disposal on and after January 1st, 2024. If the amount of organics and materials sent to disposal is higher than the threshold for 2 consecutive reporting periods or for 3 reporting periods within 3 years, then the facility, the compost facility, will not be considered a designated facility. And also, like the transfer processors handling SSO, whether or not a composter is a designated facility only impacts jurisdictions using a performance-based collection service. So we've covered transfer processors, composters, and in-vessel digesters, kind of on a high level of what requirements they have for measuring. What about landfills? Landfills themselves do not have measurement requirements. But of course, a permitted transfer processor, composter, or in-vessel digester that's co-located at the landfill still does have to do their required measurements. There are other new requirements for landfills. Landfills have to submit an organic disposal reduction status impact report, known as a SIR or an SIR, to CalRecycle by January 1st, 2023. They also have to meet new requirements for new or expanding landfills, as well as the new operator-led public meeting requirement that applies to landfills as well as other permitted solid waste facilities. So with this slide concludes part 1, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Marcus to continue with part 2 and 3.
Thank you, Kate. As a reminder, several new state minimum standards were added to the transfer processing requirements for solid waste facilities. And part 2 will focus on determining what measurement requirements would apply to a transfer processor based on several different factors. So for the overall determination, we developed a list of questions that you can ask yourself. So whether you're an operator, an LEA, or a consultant, ask yourself the following questions for each activity you're handling. And depending on the answers, you'll be able to determine what state minimum standards may or may not apply for each of those activities. So the first question you can ask yourself is, what material stream is the facility handling? The second question is, could the facility be a consolidation site? Third question is there any processing happening on site? How is that material being handled? And 4, where is that material going when it leaves the facility? All of these will help influence what standards may or may not apply, and we'll take a look at those in a little bit more detail right now. So with this first question, what streams does the facility handle? The reason this is important is because you want to know what waste streams are coming into this facility, because certain state minimum standards may apply depending on how that material is handled. So the ones that are big 1383 focused and what may require measurements is going to be anything from a source separated organic waste collection stream, also known as SSO, your mixed waste organic collection stream, also known as MO, and your gray container waste, which is part of the gray container collection stream. So all 3 of these have some type of 1383 focus, and depending on the rest of the answers to these questions, that material may be required to be measured. And depending on the facilities, there are facilities which some receive all 3, some maybe receive just 1 or 2. That's one thing you're going to want to focus on, is just know how to classify that waste coming into your facility, because then you'll eventually know what standards may apply to that material type. There's obviously material you'll want to know is just not subject to the regulations, and a big one there is C&D waste. And so as long as construction and demolition waste is kept separate from your other solid waste streams, it's not required to be measured. It's not a 1383 focus. That also includes other materials such as tires or e-waste, appliances, material like that. It's just pretty much we want to focus on what's organic and if it's part of those SSO, mixed waste, or gray container streams. That being said, another big factor that came into play with implementation is any material from a jurisdiction that has a waiver in place. Those waivers may actually influence how this waste is classified. And so one thing to keep in mind is that if the material is from a rural exemption waiver or a low population waiver in a jurisdiction, then that material is actually not subject to regulations. We consider that material neither MO, SSO, or gray container. Therefore, it wouldn't be subject to measurements. And so these are the kind of things you'd want to look at and why it's important to know what streams are actually coming into your facility. So for those waste streams that are subject to the regulations, we wanted to make sure we covered what each one might consist of. And so your SSO stream is going to be any organics collected in a blue, green, or other kind of organics container. So a brown container, for example, that may contain things like food waste. You may also see uncontainerized waste. So that could be from things like uncontainerized yard or green waste collection services. And that would also include any self-hauled material as well. So residents bringing in things like yard waste or mixed recyclables, all of that would fall under an SSO stream. As far as your mixed waste collection stream, that's going to be any organics in a gray container from either a single, two, or three container service where that jurisdiction is allowing organics to go in those containers. You may also see self-hauled mixed waste as well. So any material coming in that's commingled with organics, all of that potentially falls under a mixed waste stream as well. As for the gray container collection stream, this stream is part of a three container collection service where that jurisdiction prohibits the placement of organic waste. So to help distinguish between this stream and a mixed waste stream is to keep in mind what the jurisdiction allows. If they allow organics to go in that container, then consider it mixed waste, but if they prohibit organics, then consider it gray container. And another thing to keep in mind is that any self-hauled material, such as trash or other solid waste, that is coming in source separated, operators can actually consider that part of the gray container stream in terms of classifying and overall what measurements may be required. So once you determine the waste streams coming into these facilities, the next question you're going to want to ask yourself is, could those transfer processors potentially be consolidation sites? So one thing to keep in mind is that the LEA will be the one to make the ultimate determination, and it's based on whether those activities meet the definition of a consolidation site and also meet the specific state minimum standards that apply to those activities. To meet the definition of a consolidation site, the activity itself cannot conduct any processing activities. And as far as the specific state minimum standards, those activities must keep any SSO separate from all other solid waste streams, and any SSO or mixed waste sent off-site must be sent to another transfer processor that will measure that material. If all that criteria can be met, then the LEA can ultimately make the determination that those transfer processors are consolidation sites. And the reason why that is significant and why we ask this question is because consolidation sites are not subject to any measurement requirements and any record keeping or reporting requirements specific to those measurements. So for this next question that we want to ask, is there any processing occurring on site? And obviously with the previous question, if there is processing occurring on site, they're not a consolidation site. But during implementation, for those facilities that weren't consolidation sites, we received a lot of questions for any material that's not processed in that facility, does it still have to be measured? And the answer is yes. So any material in these facilities, regardless of if it's processed or not, if they're not a consolidation site, then they will still be required to measure that material, assuming it's from a mixed waste or source separated collection stream or a gray container stream. The reason why there's been a lot of confusion with this is that for how that language is written and those measurement requirements, it does specify after processing is when measurements take place, but the actual intent of that language was just to show that measurements take place after material's been handled, but prior to it leaving the facility. So if it has been processed, such as cardboard or baling, those measurements would take place after baling's taken place. But if it's for material like green material that just gets handled, consolidated, and sent out, that material would still be measured, but right before it's leaving the facility. And so that's a lot of confusion that we did want to clear up, and the reason why this question is important. So the final question you want to ask is, where's the material going when it leaves the facility? So this is probably one of the best questions to ask because this will ultimately tell you what state minimum standards will apply. Because once you know the waste streams coming into the facility, knowing where it's going is going to tell you what standard will apply. So in this example, our first thing we wanted to go over is any SSO or mixed waste that's sent off site for further processing, recovery, or end use. All of that's going to fall under those measurements for recovery. So those specific state minimum standards, that's going to be 17409.5.2 for mixed waste and 17409.5.4 for SSO. For the other set of measurements, any SSO or mixed waste that's sent off-site for landfill disposal, all of that's going to be covered under those landfill disposal measurements. And those specific sections are 17409.5.3 for mixed waste and 17409.5.5 for SSO. The other thing you want to keep in mind is that any organics that are sent off-site to be used as alternative daily cover or alternative intermediate cover, all of that is also going to fall under those measurement for disposal. Because now under Article 2, any organic waste that's used as ADC or AIC, all of that does have to be counted as disposal. And whether that's a separate measurement or if somehow they can pull a representative sample of their other material sent for disposal, that's going to be what needs to be measured per those requirements. As for gray container waste, this one's a little bit different in terms of how those measurements are going to work or what's required. So for SSO and mixed waste, it's easy. Depending on where that material's going is going to dictate which state minimum standards apply. But for gray container, there's actually only one state minimum standard that will apply, and that's the gray container waste evaluations under 17409.5.7. So it doesn't matter where the material is going. This waste evaluation is actually going to be on a front end measurement on when that material is received. And as far as the specific threshold that triggers when a facility is required to do a waste evaluation, it's going to depend on if that facility receives 500 tons or more of gray container waste from a single jurisdiction. And so if it receives 200 tons from one jurisdiction, 300 tons from another, even though that's 500 tons, it's still not enough to meet that threshold. It's as if it's 500 tons from a single jurisdiction annually, and this is going to be one measurement per quarter, and it's on the front end of material rather than the back end, unlike mixed waste and source separated waste. So to follow up from that last question, if we know that measurements are required, we know what the waste streams are, we know where that material is going, we know the specific measurement requirements that do apply, but what exactly are we trying to capture in those measurements? And that's something we wanted to cover just a little bit here. So for any material that's being sent for recovery, and again, that's anything for recovery, further processing, or end use, we want to know how much of that outgoing material is actually organic and how much of it is what we call incompatible material. I don't want to go into too much detail on incompatible since we're covering that later, but the purpose of these measurements is to tell us that organic fraction and that incompatible fraction because that's going to go into that overall data that needs to be reported through RDRS. For the material sent for disposal, it's pretty much capturing the same thing, except rather than focusing on incompatible material, these specific measurements will focus on that organic fraction as well as that non-organic fraction. And again, that's going to be really important for that overall data that needs to be reported through RDRS. For the gray container waste evaluations, these actually focus on material that we call remnant organic material. And specifically, that material is just organics that are present in that gray container stream when it's normally prohibited. And that's actually what is trying to be captured in this overall evaluation is of that gray container stream that's coming in, even if jurisdictions are trying to prohibit organics being placed in that container, this measurement is going to capture whether there's organics still present in that waste stream. And again, that's data that we're going to want reported through RDRS. So that's the overall purpose and what we're trying to capture in these measurements. So getting back to what exactly is incompatible material, it's not just contamination, it's any non-organic material like glass or plastic, but it can actually also include any organic waste that the receiving facility is not permitted or authorized to accept or can't actually perform recovery on. The best example I use is palm fronds, which typically doesn't end up in a final compost process. It ends up in the residuals being sent for disposal. So for example, a transfer station sending any palm fronds and their green waste to a composter, if that composter can't recover that palm frond material, then it should actually be considered incompatible material when it comes time to doing those measurements. And one thing to say is that incompatible material, when we measure for that in these measurements, it's in all SSO and mixed waste streams, and it's only on the material that's sent for recovery and use or further processing. we don't capture measurements of incompatible in that material sent for disposal. So we've talked a lot about measurements, but how many measurements does a facility actually have to take? And the answer is it depends. The regulations require operators to sample any SSO or mixed waste for 10 consecutive operating days per quarter, and it's on any days that material leaves the facility during that period. So what that looks like exactly is an operator can select a 10-day window each quarter, and any day materials leaving the facility, they're going to want to capture a measurement of that material type. And a lot of the questions we get quite often is, well, what if the facility only operates 2 to 3 days a week? And what it states in the reg is that it's 10 consecutive operating days. So if you are only operating 2 to 3 days a week, then your 10-day measurement period might extend over several weeks until you hit that 10 consecutive operating day period. The other question we get quite often is, well, what if I only send material out every other day? How many measurements are taken? And one of the things we definitely wanted to provide clarity on, because a lot of confusion came from operators thinking that it was samples every day for 10 days during that window, when it wasn't actually the case. Measurements are only going to be required on when material leaves the facility. So if you are only sending material out every other day, then you're only going to be sampling every other day. And we'll have this really nice, helpful graphic that I'll show in the next slide, and we can go over this in a little bit more detail. So here's an example of what a 10-day period might look like to a facility. And as you can see in this example, the facility doesn't operate Saturday and Sunday. And so in order to meet that 10 consecutive operating day period, they're sampling on a Monday through Friday, followed by another Monday through Friday to meet that 10-day window. And as you can see from the waste streams, they have both an SSO and a mixed waste stream, and a variety of outputs going for recovery as well as disposal. And what this table is also meant to show, indicated by the X's, is just how the number of samples can vary because it will depend on how material flows through the facility. And just a reminder, it's not a sample every day for 10 days. It's only going to be when material leaves the facility that day. And so with these examples, we have mixed paper only going out 4 days, so 4 samples were taken. Material sent for disposal from mixed waste was 4 as well, so there's only 4 samples. And so that's one thing to keep in mind, is just it may vary each quarter, and it's going to depend overall how that material flows and how that facility operates. If you'd like more information on measurements, definitely check out some of the guidance we have available on our webpage. We have these new diagrams that show a breakdown of the different waste streams, and depending on how material flows at the facility, what measurement standards would apply based on that outgoing material. And we also have measurement videos that if you haven't checked out already, definitely do so. These do a nice breakdown of the overall measurement requirements and give a step-by-step process for how those are done. And so right now with SSO, we have a link to an SSO measurement video, and that's for outgoing green materials. So again, if you haven't checked that out already, we'll post the link here as well as to the guidance, and definitely check that out when you have time. We have videos for a mixed waste stream as well, one on both recovery and disposal. So we'll make sure we have a link available for both these videos as well as the diagram shown here. As for gray container waste, we don't have a gray container waste evaluation video, but we do have guidance available on our webpage, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. As far as what requires transfer processors to have to conduct waste evaluations, it's going to depend on the amount of gray container waste they receive. And so if they receive at least 500 tons annually from at least one jurisdiction, then they will be required to conduct waste evaluations. And as far as when this reg went into effect, it went into effect as of July 1st, 2022. And as far as the number of waste evaluations required per quarter, unlike mixed waste and source separated waste, where it's a 10-day measurement window, there's only one gray container waste evaluation required per quarter. And so that's one thing to keep in mind as far as frequency when looking at this measurement in terms of the other measurements. So again, one important thing to remember, and this just has to do with that overall threshold. And so which, if any of these facilities needs to perform a gray container waste evaluation? Is it facility A, who receives 450 tons from jurisdiction A, 475 from jurisdiction B, or is it facility B, who receives 550 tons from jurisdiction A and 100 tons from jurisdiction B? If you said B, you are correct, and that's because they received 500 tons from at least one jurisdiction annually. Whereas with facility A, the reason they don't meet the threshold is because they did not receive 500 tons from a single jurisdiction. That totals obviously is over 500 tons, but it needs to be from at least one jurisdiction, not all together. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind, and some things you might want to evaluate while you're looking at these facilities. We also have some additional guidance available, and this has to do with special facility scenarios. And so we did talk a lot about consolidation sites. So if you haven't already, we do have guidance available. This breaks down a number of scenarios, and depending on how that material is flowing through the facility, it'll tell you and help you figure out whether that would meet the definition of a consolidation site. We also have co-located site guidance, and for co-located facilities, this is where you may have either a transfer processor, composter, maybe an vessel, all in the same facility boundary. And this guidance just helps you figure out where measurements might take place based on those co-located activities. So the last thing we wanted to cover before we move on to the next section has to do with whether there are any exceptions to those requirements we discussed. And so department issued waivers may actually have an impact overall on those waste classifications of some of those streams. So we do recommend becoming very familiar with your facilities, understanding what waste streams are coming in, and if they are actually being received from any jurisdictions with these waivers in place. Because elevation waivers, they do allow for food and food solo paper in that gray container, but based on the collection service in place, it will either be gray or mixed waste. And so if it's a 3 container service, then it'll be considered a gray container collection stream. But if it's a 2 or single container service, then it'll be part of a mixed waste stream. And for rural exemption and low population waivers, it's actually a little different. So any waste from jurisdictions with this waiver, it's actually considered waived from Article 3 requirements. So therefore, it's not SSO, mixed waste, or gray container. And the significance of that is that because it's neither of those waste streams, it's not going to be subject to any of those specific measurements. We have guidance available if you haven't checked it out already. It's our gray container and mixed waste classification guidance. So we'll make the link available for you here and definitely check it out when you have time. So with that, we'll move on to our next section where we'll discuss record keeping and reporting requirements for transfer processors. So SB 1383 added several new record keeping and reporting requirements to the existing regulations. And so transfer processors now have to be required to track additional data that does have to do with some of those new waste streams, as well as those measurements being conducted. And if a facility is receiving both an MO and an SSO stream, you're going to want to see records for both. And so the new data that's going to need to be tracked through records is the daily incoming weights of any MO or SSO, the daily outgoing weights of organic material that's recovered from either an MO or SSO stream, the daily outgoing weights of any material that's sent for disposal from an MO or SSO stream. You'll also want to see the results of each sample that's being conducted, as well as the incompatible materials calculation based on that measurement. We'll also provide some examples of what that might look like on the next slide. So here's an example of what that might look like based on tonnage received. We'll want to know the incoming weights based on whatever the material stream is, whether it's MO or SSO. We want to know the outgoing weight of those materials sent for recovery. And then we want to know the outgoing weight of those materials sent for disposal. And again, if they are receiving multiple waste streams, they're going to want to have records for both MO and SSO. We're also going to need to see those additional records as well that would include whatever the results of the measurements were, as well as the result from their incompatible material calculation. As for reporting requirements, operators are now required to report this information that's specific to SB 1383 through RDRS each quarter. And a lot of this new information is based on the new waste streams, as well as those measurements being conducted. So we have received a lot of questions on how to report and what to report specifically. So we did want to provide some helpful information. We do recommend, if you do have any questions throughout this process, that you should reach out to our RDRS team directly. So we'll make their email available for you to reach out. But as far as how this is broken down, so for any MO and SSO streams, RDRS is going to break this down into 2 separate sections. So it's going to start with an overall quarterly amount of numbers, and then it's another section that's based specifically on those 10-day measurements. And so for the overall quarterly reporting, operators are going to want to report the total incoming weight of any MO and SSO streams. So this is that waste stream as a whole, so prior to being processed, so those daily weights that are being recorded, it's going to want the quarterly total. And for the next few sections, it's going to want the total outgoing material for recovery for any MO and SSO streams. And so this again is going to be based on those daily records, and it's that waste stream as a whole, so that would include any organics as well as the non-organics and incompatibles. And the other information that needs to be reported is going to be that total outgoing weight of any of those MO and SSO streams for disposal. So again, that's going to be based on those daily weights and that waste stream as a whole. So any organics and non-organics. The next section is going to be specific to those 10-day measurement periods. So at the end of those measurement requirements, you get a sum of organic waste that's recovered, as well as what's disposed based on all those outputs sent off site during that 10-day period. So that's what those numbers are, and that's what's specifically going to be reported in this section. So just to quickly summarize, we wanted to put this in a nice visual. So that overall quarterly tonnage that's being reported, we want to know the overall incoming. And in this example, it's for MO, but it's going to be the same process for SSO as well. So that daily incoming weight, and we want that for the total for the quarter. And we also want the total outgoing. So any material sent out for recovery from that MO and SSO stream, we want to know that quarterly total based on daily tonnage. And we want to know the outgoing for disposal as well. And again, that's going to be based on daily tonnage. And it's that waste stream as a whole. So we're going to see that organic and non-organic fraction. And then for the 10-day measurement period, we want to only know the organic fraction. So how much organics were recovered from an MO and SSO waste stream, and how much organics were disposed from an MO and SSO waste stream. So hopefully that gets a better idea. And again, for any questions on RDRS reporting, you can definitely reach out to us, but we also recommend reaching out directly to our RDRS team. And again, we'll make that email available for everyone to access.
Hello again, everyone. With this slide, we're going to begin part 4 of the training. Using the information that Marcus just shared in part 2 and 3, we're going to go through a real-world scenario of a transfer processor complying with the measurement, record keeping, and reporting requirements. The transfer processor we're going to focus on is fictional, but the material it receives is similar to what a real transfer processor might receive. Also, the tonnages discussed and that we're going to have for this facility do reflect tonnages that have been reported to CalRecycle for a large volume transfer processor facility. So let's get started. So here's our scenario. I am trying to assist Trash City Transfer Station, a large volume transfer processing facility, to determine what needs to be done to comply with the new facility requirements. So the staff at Trash City have described to me all of the material that that facility receives. I've also asked if those streams are processed, or are they just directly transferred without being processed. I want to see if this facility could be a consolidation site. Right off the bat, looking at my incoming streams, I see that no, this facility processes its curbside blue recyclables bin. It also processes a curbside trash bin that has organics allowed in that bin. It processes these on site, therefore this is not going to be a consolidation site. I do see that the curbside food and yard waste bin is directly transferred, not processed, along with that curbside yard waste bin and another kind of trash bin where organics are not allowed. So maybe these streams could be part of a consolidation site activity. It's something I'm going to keep in mind as we move forward throughout the example. So now we want to identify those incoming streams to the transfer station and determine what stream type they are so we can plan what measurements we're going to have to do. So going from the top to the bottom, this is the same list that was on the last slide. That curbside blue recyclables bin, that's an SSO stream per the definition of SSO in the regulation. Same with the food and yard waste bin and the yard waste only bin. Those are also SSO streams. The trash bin, that does not allow organics to be put in that container. That is the definition of a gray container waste stream. So that's a gray waste stream we have. Then we have the trash bin that does allow organics to be placed in the bin. That is going to be a mixed waste organic stream or MO stream. And then the last one the facility receives, that's self-hauled e-waste and batteries that people can drop off. That stream is not subject to the new regulations. It does not fit within the MO, SSO, or gray container waste stream definitions, and therefore for the purposes of this exercise and for 1383, there's no measurements required. We're not concerned about it. So now that I've classified these streams, I thought it was a good idea to check to see if any of the material that Trash City was receiving was from an area with a low population waiver, a high elevation waiver, or rural exemption. If material was received from an area with a low population waiver or a rural exemption, then that material is not subject to measurement. It can still be measured if the facility chooses to do so, which could happen in the scenario that it's too difficult to really discern what comes from an area with that low pop waiver or exemption, if pickup routes are crisscrossing between areas with the waiver and without, or if the amount of waste that's collected from areas with that waiver or exemption is, so small. If some of the incoming material, or any of this incoming material was from an area with a high elevation waiver, then that waste has to be treated as a gray container or mixed waste organic stream, depending on the number of bins in that collection system. So I encourage you to reach out to the local enforcement agency or to CalRecycle if you have more questions about this and how to determine if any of the waste coming into a facility is from a jurisdiction that might have a waiver or exemption. So I've turned my camera off for this slide because I want you to see this graphic entirely as we walk through it. So we've just finished classifying the streams. We've also determined that Trash City is not a consolidation site because there is processing happening on site. We know that measurements definitely have to occur at this facility. So now we want to figure out what measurements have to be taken. And we're going to do this by finding out where the material goes when it leaves the facility. So this graphic is similar to the one that we have in our example measurements guidance document available on our website. I'm using that graphic and I tailored it to this specific facility scenario. So at the top, you're going to see all the incoming streams that we've identified as SSO, MO, and gray container. So we're going to start at the left side with these green boxes. This is our residential food and yard waste bin and residential yard waste bin that Trash City receives. The facility told me that they combine these two bins and they send it directly to a compost facility. Okay, so I know that this SSO is going for further processing and recovery. It's headed to compost. Therefore, the facility needs to measure this material, a 10-day measurement period per quarter, 200-pound samples every time this material leaves the facility during the 10-day measurement period. They directly transfer it. They don't process it on site. So there's no material destined for disposal from this stream. So no measurements to take on that. You might be asking, okay, well, this SSO material is directly transferred to another facility that's taking measurements, the composter. So why can't this flow be considered a consolidation site activity? Why do we need to measure it here at Trash City? And the reason is a consolidation site can only send material to a transfer processor that will be taking measurements. This material, this green waste, is going to a composter, so it doesn't meet that requirement. Therefore, it must be measured at Trash City. If this material was leaving Trash City and going to another transfer processor, then we wouldn't need to measure it here, but that's not the case, as you can see. It's going to compost. So we've established the measurement requirements for those green streams. Now we're going to move on to the next stream on the right, the blue bin residential recyclables that Trash City receives. This material is processed at Trash City. They generate 3 organic material types. They make bales of OCC, otherwise known as cardboard, mixed paper, and the occasional white office pack. There's also residual from this blue bin processing that is sent to disposal. So there are 2 different types of measurements for this stream. We have to measure the OCC, mixed paper, and white office pack. That, like the others, has a 10-day period of measurement every quarter. Each time any of those bales is sent off site, it needs to be measured during that 10-day period, just like those organics that are going to the composter. Then we're also sampling that residual from the blue bin processing. That's going to have to be measured for the presence of organics, right? Because it's material destined for disposal. We want to know how much organics is in that material. Now we're going to move on to the right of that. We're going to go to our gray container waste stream, which is denoted by that small gray box. So this is the trash bin that Trash City receives, where organics are prohibited from being placed in that bin by the jurisdiction. So when this material arrives at the facility, it's tipped directly into a larger truck and sent directly to landfill. This facility needs to take 1 200-pound sample of the incoming waste each quarter, only 1. That's the requirement for gray container waste streams, and that's outlined in section 17409.5.7. Now we're going to move on to our last stream, the MO stream. This is that residential trash bin where organics are allowed. to be placed in that bin by the jurisdiction. This stream is processed at Trash City. Trash City is recovering food waste from this stream, and they tell me that the food waste is going to compost, which is considered further processing or recovery. Therefore, this food waste, this organic material type derived from the MO stream, is subject to measurement, right? Again, it's a 10-day measurement period, 200-pound sample. Each time material from this stream or this food waste is being sent off site during that 10-day period. Note that this food waste from the MO stream cannot be combined with the food waste and yard waste from the SSO stream, since we need separate measurements for material from the MO stream and SSO stream. So there's also material destined for landfill from this MO processing, right? They're processing at Trash City. Some of the stuff is pulled out and is being sent to landfill. That has to be measured, a 10-day measurement period. We're looking for the amount of organics in the material going to disposal. So stepping back now, we've identified all the measurement requirements for this facility and what they need to measure each quarter. In a few slides, we're going to be prepping for those quarterly measurements, so this information will be back. But as for now, we're going to use these stream classifications we just figured out, and now we're already going to start thinking about the data that we need to record and report to CalRecycle based on what we figured out so far. So since we've identified the MO and SSO streams that Trash City receives, we want to make sure we're collecting and recording data in a way that's going to make it really easy for us to report at the end of the quarter. I'm covering this topic now, quarterly data, because it's not dependent on any measurements that Trash City is going to make. If Trash City is following those record keeping requirements that Marcus covered in part 3, then we'll have all the data we need for this required quarterly data. So again, Trash City handles both SSO and MO, so we're going to be required to report on both of those streams. The first thing we need to figure out is the sum of all incoming SSO and MO. For SSO, you can see on this table, it's the total tons of the blue recyclables bin, the curbside food and yard waste bin, and the curbside yard waste bin. Altogether, we know that Trash City receives 40,900 tons of incoming SSO in this quarter. This number is what's going to be reported in RDRS. And then for MO, there was only one incoming MO stream to Trash City, and that was that curbside trash bin where organics are allowed. They received 18,750 tons of that during the quarter. That's the number that's going to be reported in RDRS. So we have a couple more numbers we need to figure out for our quarterly data, so we're going to get to those next. The second quarterly number we need to report is the total outgoing weight of organic material recovered for further processing, recovery, or end use. This is for organic material types only. This does not include metal, plastic, or any other non-organic material that Trash City is recovering during the quarter. So the organic material types recovered from the SSO stream are, as we've covered, cardboard, mixed paper, some white office pack, and yard and food waste. That's that stream that's going to compost. Altogether, there was 33,805 tons of those SSO organic materials recovered during the quarter. For MO, the only organic material type recovered is food waste that they were processing, right, that stream on site, and they're recovering food waste to send to compost. So we know Trash City sent 4,900 tons of that to compost in the quarter. Both those totals are what's going to be reported in RDRS. Now, the last piece of quarterly data we need to record and report is the total outgoing weight of material sent for disposal. This is not asking for the organic fraction of that material going to disposal, because this is not dependent on any measurements, right? This is just all the material from SSO and MO that is sent for disposal. So the only material going to disposal from the SSO stream was that residual from the blue recycling bin processing that's happening on site at Trash City. So Trash City sent 2,095 tons of that to disposal in the quarter. Then we have our MO stream. The only material going to disposal from that was the processing of that trash bin with organics allowed, our only singular MO stream. So there was 8,000 tons of that MO material that was sent to disposal in the quarter. So putting this data together, this is what it's going to look like when we enter it into RDRS. Something to remember is for both the SSO and MO, you see that the sum of all incoming streams does not equal the sum of, total outgoing weight of organic material recovered plus total outgoing weight of material sent for disposal. For example, these two numbers together are about 36,000 tons, whereas we reported 40,900 tons of incoming SSO. And this is because the number of outgoing weight of material recovered is not including any non-organic material that Trash City recovered, like glass, plastic, or metal. We're only reporting the outgoing weight of organic material recovered, so it won't sum out. So this is the quarterly data that needs reported. Now we're going to move back to taking measurements, looking at what measurement data needs to be reported in RDRS, and going through an actual measurement process. So the purpose of the facility measurements and our 10-day measurement period is to determine two numbers that we're going to need to report in RDRS. The first number is the total weight of organic material recovered. Using a very simplified example, if we only produced cardboard at Trash City and that was the only organic material type that was recovered, the question we're really asking is how much of the cardboard recovered in the 10-day measurement period is cardboard? Is cardboard versus incompatible material. The second number we need is the total weight of organic material going to disposal. So again, using a simplified example with the blue curbside recycling bin that Trash City receives and processes, to determine this necessary number, we're asking the question, how much paper or other organic materials are in the blue bin residuals over that 10-day period? So we know what we need to report in RDRS, these two numbers, but how do we get to this? What do we need to do? So now we're going to revisit our facility flow graphic to remind ourselves of all the measurements we need to take to help us get to these two numbers. So earlier in part 4, we determined all the different outputs we need to measure for the SSO, MO, and gray container streams. A transfer processor can choose any 10-day period in the quarter for the measurement period. But remember, if the facility is closed, that's not an operating day and can't be counted towards the 10-day period. Here, I've listed all the material types that Trash City is required to measure. While this table shows all the days in the 10-day period that material left the facility, you may or may not obviously know this information beforehand. I've made this chart for teaching purposes only, but of course, encourage you to make a similar table to track when material leaves the facility or pre-plan what days you'll need to measure if you do find it helpful. So, as Trash City is only required to take a sample on the day material leaves the facility, you can see that most of our material types won't be sampled each day of the measurement period. The first loads of mixed paper and cardboard from the SSO stream leave on Wednesday. So I'll be taking a representative sample of each of those outgoing loads of both mixed paper and cardboard on Wednesday. I will only be taking 4 samples of each of those materials during the 10-day measurement period. And for white office pack, it looks like the facility only collects enough to ship out once every 2 weeks, so we're only going to have 1 sample that falls in the 10-day measurement period that we need to take. In the last row of this table, you can see the gray container evaluation I've added. Trash City can take this single sample any day of the quarter, but for our purposes, let's say they chose to do it during the 10-day measurement period to make things easier. So now I want to walk through each step of sampling and record keeping, and I'm going to use 2 of these outgoing material types as an example. So I'm going to walk through each step of the sampling and record keeping process for the SSO cardboard we recovered, as well as the mixed organic MO material destined for disposal. So we're going to start first with cardboard. Taking a look at this chart, we want to note that cardboard is going to leave the facility 4 times during the measurement period. So we're going to be ending up with data from 4 samples. So in Trash City's 10-day measurement period, the first load of cardboard leaves the facility on Wednesday, August 17th. So that's going to be our first sample day. The entire load going out is 32 tons. The operator takes a 200-pound sample from that load. That's random and representative of the entire load. The sample we took was a little over 200 pounds, which is perfectly fine. the sample can be over 200 pounds, just can't be under 200 pounds unless the whole load is less than 200 pounds. Then you'll take that whole load as the sample. So the facility pulled out the incompatible material. Now we're separating incompatibles from our organics. For this material type, an incompatible material was any inorganic materials as well as any organic material that wasn't cardboard. The broker we're sending this to only wants cardboard, wants it to be extremely clean, so no other paper is allowed in the bale. So anything that isn't cardboard is an incompatible material for this material type. So after separating, we found that there were 4 pounds of incompatibles, and that left 198.5 pounds of cardboard. With this information, we can figure out the organic ratio of the sample. We do that by dividing the weight of the organics without incompatibles, the 198.5 pounds of cardboard, by the sample weight, 202.5 pounds. That gives us our organic ratio of 0.98, which is 98%. That sample was 98% cardboard. Now we're going to apply this organic ratio from our sample to the total load of cardboard sent off site on the 17th. So we multiply the 32 tons of material by our 0.98. This gives us 31.4 tons. This is the total weight of cardboard recovered. Alternatively, you can think about it as the total weight of the incompatible materials is 0.6 tons, 2% of those 32 tons sent off-site. So bales of cardboard leave the facility 3 more times during the 10-day measurement period. So here's a table with our results from the August 17th sample we just walked through, as well as results from the samples on the 19th, 23rd, and 26th. So we've calculated the organic ratio from each sample and then used that ratio to find the total weight of cardboard recovered. Now we add up all that cardboard recovered from the 4 samples and see that there's a total of 149.3 tons of cardboard that was recovered during the 10-day measurement period. This is the number that will help us with our final sums we're putting into RDRS. So we've finished our cardboard sampling and those calculations that are necessary to determine the total amount of cardboard recovered from the SSO stream during the 10-day measurement period. So now, we're pretending these are not all done in similar time periods, but we're moving on to the other material type I wanted to go through, the mixed waste organic stream material that's destined for landfill. So the first load of this material left the facility on August 16th. There was 150 tons in that load that was being sent off-site to landfill that day. A sample was taken of this outgoing load, and it was 203 pounds when we weighed that sample. Staff separated the organic waste from the non-organic waste and weighed those 2 material piles. They found that there was 42 pounds of organic waste and 161 pounds of non-organic waste. With this information, we can figure out the organic ratio of that sample. So 42 pounds of organic material divided by the total sample weight of 203 pounds gives us a ratio of 0.28. The sample was 28% organic material. Now we're going to multiply this ratio, 0.28, by the weight of all the material sent off site that day, 150 tons. This gives us 42 tons, the total weight of organics disposed in this load of MO material. This is 28% of that entire 150 ton load, 42 tons. Now, MO material destined for disposal left the facility 6 times during the 10-day measurement period for a total of 6 samples. Here in this chart, we have our data from the August 16th sample we just walked through, as well as the data from the 5 later samples. So if we add up the weight of all the organics disposed that we calculated from each outgoing load, we get a total weight of 192.9 tons of organics disposed. This number is what we'll need for reporting an RDRS for the 10-day measurement period. Now remember, the objective of the facility measurements is to determine how much organic material is being disposed, as well as how much organic material is being recovered, which is what we calculated for the cardboard. So now let's assume that we did our measurements and calculations for our other streams. For SSO and MO material that's sent for further processing, recovery, or end use, we have calculated the total weight of organics recovered during the 10-day period for each material type. Our recovered material types for SSO were mixed paper, cardboard, white office pack, and yard and food waste to compost. For our MO stream, our recovered organics were just the organic material that we sent to compost. We want to add up all the organics recovered so that we have one number for the entire SSO stream and one number for the MO stream. We will report this number in RDRS. For SSO, we're going to report that there were 3,225.4 tons of organics recovered in the 10-day measurement period. And for MO, we're going to report that there were 485.3 tons of organics recovered in the 10-day measurement period. For SSO and MO material that was sent to disposal, we have calculated the total weight of organics disposed in our 10-day period. We walked through this process with the MO disposal stream, and we calculated that 192.9 tons of organics are destined for disposal. That's what we're going to report in RDRS. And for SSO, we would measure and calculate that the same way that we did in the example for MO. So saying that we did that, our facility determined that 80.4 tons of organics were disposed from that stream during the 10-day period. Now we're going to put this measurement period data together with that quarterly data we covered earlier to show you exactly what Trash City will be reporting in RDRS. So when Trash City is filling out their quarterly RDRS report, they're going to get to the organic measurement tab, and they're going to check, yes, this facility receives SSO streams, and yes, this facility receives MO streams. Then there's going to be some fields that will drop down and ask them to input the 5 pieces of data that we've just been diligently calculating. So this is the 3 quarterly data numbers we discussed earlier in part 4. Number 1, the sum of all incoming SSO and MO streams. Number 2, the total outgoing weight of material recovered, which is the weight of all the organic material sent off-site for recovery, not the proportion of those material types that's actually organic. And then number 3, the total outgoing weight of all material sent for disposal for SSO and for MO. Again, not the proportion that's organic, but all the material sent to disposal. Remember, the sum of all incoming streams may not equal the total outgoing weight of that organic material recovered and organic material disposed if the facility is recovering inorganic material like metal and plastic. Trash City recovers other non-organic material, so that won't be reflected in any of this quarterly data, and that's why these 3 sums are not going to add up. So then we have our 10-day measurement data, which we just figured out. This is the total weight of the organics recovered in that 10-day period and the total weight of organics disposed in the 10-day period. So this is what's reported in RDRS. CalRecycle has developed a record-keeping template that looks very similar to all those steps we just went through to get to these numbers. And if you're interested in seeing if that template works for you, I would highly recommend trying it out unless you already have a template that you prefer using. Because Trash City handles and reports on a mixed waste organic stream, this means that CalRecycle will be evaluating the facility to see if they meet the definition of a high diversion organic waste processing facility. This calculation uses the 10-day measurement period data only, and it uses that data from the last 4 reported quarters. That equation is the sum of recovered organics for the last 4 quarters divided by the sum of recovered organics and sum of disposed organics. This equation is outlined in section 18815.5E of Title 14. So for this example, let's take 4 quarters of data submitted by Trash City from quarter 1, 2022 to quarter 4, 2022. We just walked through our report submittal for quarter 3, so you'll see that those numbers look familiar. What we're going to do is we're going to add up all the recovered organics from the 4 quarters and divide that by the recovered organics and disposed organics. Once we do that calculation, we get a total 72.8. This is the annual recovery efficiency of Trash City. So with this number, they currently meet the definition of a high diversion organic waste processing facility, since that threshold in 2022 is 50% annual recovery efficiency to be considered high diversion. When Trash City reports their Q1 2023 data, this calculation will be done again, but it won't be using any Q1 2022 data, right? It only uses the last 4 quarters of data. So it would be using Q1 2023 and also the Q4, Q3, and Q2 of 2022. The recovery efficiency is not a static number. It changes every quarter. So we just reviewed a detailed scenario for a transfer processor, Trash City, that walked through the measurements, the reporting, and how CalRecycle calculates a facility's annual recovery efficiency to see if it is in fact a high diversion organic waste processing facility. So with that, we're going to begin part 5 of the training, which is an overview of the incompatible materials limit and how to calculate it. I will continue to use the fictional Trash City transfer stations data for this section as well. Let's start with reviewing what the incompatible materials limit is. The intent of this limit is to determine the cleanliness of the organic waste separated from the SSO and MO streams to ensure that accepting facilities who are receiving that waste are receiving non-contaminated material. The limit is no more than 20% incompatibles in SSO and MO organic material sent for further processing, recovery, and end use by 2022, and no more than 10% incompatibles by 2024. If there's more than 20% incompatibles in these streams, then the facility can only send organic material for recovery to 1, a transfer processor that meets the incompatible limit, 2, a composter or in-vessel digester that has less than 20% organics in its material sent to disposal as of now, and less than 10% as of 2024, or 3, a recycling center. To be clear, a recycling center is an operation that passes the 3-part test per the definition outlined in section 17402.5D. For more background on this incompatible materials limit requirement, you can review section 17409.5.8 of the SB 1383 regulations. So now let's calculate this incompatible materials limit using our Trash City example for Q3 2022. So that was the quarter we just walked through in detail in part 4, and we're going to use the recovered organic waste amounts to help us figure this out. So the formula for the incompatible materials limit is the weight of incompatibles for SSO and MO during the 10-day period divided by the outgoing weight of SSO and MO sent off-site for recovery during the 10-day period. All the SSO and MO organic material types that Trash City recovered. Remember, they recovered mixed paper, cardboard, white paper, yard and food waste from the SSO stream, and then organics, food waste from the MO stream. So now let's start with the cardboard data we collected when we took measurements and figure out what we're really going to need for this calculation. Here's those 4 samples of cardboard that were taken in the 10-day measurement period for Q3. We had captured the weight of the cardboard load sent off site, as well as the weight of our sample and the weight of the incompatible material in the sample. All this information we already wrote down in part 4 for our record keeping. So instead of determining the organic ratio, to help us out here, we want to determine the ratio of incompatible material. Now, hint, hint, this number is just 1 minus the organic ratio we calculated in part 4. For example, for that August 17th sample, you would divide the 4 pounds of incompatibles by 202.5 pound sample weight. This gives us a 0.02 incompatibles ratio. The organic ratio of the sample was 0.98. 1 minus 0.98 is 0.02, which is our incompatibles ratio. To get the estimated incompatibles in the day's outgoing load, we're going to take the total weight of material sent off site, that 32 tons sent out on the 17th, and multiply it by our incompatible ratio, 0.02. This gives us an estimated 0.64 tons of incompatibles that are in that total 32 tons of cardboard we sent off site that day. Now, we want to do this calculation for all 4 of the cardboard samples, and then we add up those incompatibles in the load and end up with the total weight of incompatibles over the 10-day measurement period, 6.86 tons. This will be in the numerator of our final equation for the incompatible materials limit, and the total weight of materials sent off-site, which is shown in the second column of the table, is going to be in our denominator. It's going to be on the bottom of the equation. So now let's pretend we've done this with all the other recovered organic material types that we calculated in quarter 3. So this is the table that shows if we did those same kinds of calculations for all our other recovered organic materials that we sampled at Trash City during the 10-day measurement period. We have the total weight of each material type sent off-site for recovery during that 10-day period, and we have the total weight of incompatibles that we estimated were in all that material sent off-site. So we want to add all these up so we get the total weight of all SSO and MO organics sent off-site for recovery during that measurement period. That adds up to 3,921.4 tons. And then we do the same for the incompatibles, and we get a total of 210.8 tons. Now for our final calculation. We will divide those 210.8 tons of incompatibles by the 3,921 tons of material sent off-site for recovery during our quarter 3 measurement period. Then we multiply this by 100 because we want a percentage. So this equation gives us an incompatible materials limit of 5.38%. This means of all the loads of organic materials sent off-site for further processing, recovery, or end use, about 5% of it was incompatible materials. 5.38 is obviously below the 20% incompatible limit threshold. So this organic material sent off-site from Trash City for further recovery, processing, or end use can be sent anywhere. There are no limitations on the kinds of facilities that the MO and SSO recovered material needs to be sent to. Transfer processors are required to record the incompatible materials limit calculations and the result per the record-keeping requirements. CalRecycle's optional record-keeping template does include this calculation of the incompatible materials limit. But again, if you have a record-keeping system in place already, feel free to use that. With this slide, it concludes the end of part 5, and I'll be passing it off to Mark to take you through measurements for composters and in-vessel digesters.
Thanks, Kate. So for part 6, we'll be determining the measurement requirements for both composting activities and in-vessel digestion activities. As with transfer processors, composting and in-vessel digestion activities are now required to perform measurements and any record keeping and reporting requirements specific to SB 1383. So this will include all permitted compostable material handling activities, including chip and grind, because those are subject to the composting regulations, and will also include any permitted in-vessel digestion activities. This will not include any compost or in-vessel activities that fall under those excluded tiers because they're not subject to these regulations. So to determine whether a composting or in-vessel digestion activity has to conduct measurements, there's only one question you have to ask, and that's if does material get sent for landfill disposal. The reason for this is that these measurement requirements, unlike transfer processors, only focus on what material is sent for landfill disposal. But like transfer processors, that will also include any material that's organic that's sent off-site for any ADC or AIC, since that does count towards disposal per 1383. The reason why it's important to highlight this is because a lot of questions we received during implementation was if material is sent for further processing, like to a transfer processor, for example, does the composting or in-vessel digestion activity still have to measure? And the answer is no. These measurements focus only on landfill disposal, so if it goes to anywhere else, it will not be subject to measurements. So like transfer processing, we have this information available in a nice helpful flowchart. So if you take a look, you can see that only measurements are required on the material sent for landfill disposal. Anything sent for transfer processing wouldn't be subject to measurements, as well as any finished product. But just remember that finished product would still potentially have to meet environmental health standards. But for the purpose of 1383 measurements, it's not a focus. The one thing we wanted to highlight is that when doing measurements on any material sent for disposal, there actually is certain organic waste that wouldn't have to be captured in those measurements. So it will include things like textiles, carpet, hazardous waste, and the list goes on based on this specific section in the operating standards. If you'd like to see an actual demonstration of a measurement at a compost site, we do have a video available for this as well. So we'll definitely post a link to the video as well as the flowchart and take a look if you haven't already. As for in-vessel digestion, we don't have a demonstration available for in-vessel activities, but we do have this information outlined on a flow chart, much like the rest of our activities. So definitely take a look at that guidance if you have time. And much like compost, it will only focus on the material that's sent for disposal. So any digestate, as long as it's going to any other activity that's not a landfill, it won't have to be measured. And much like compost, there's still a specific list of organics that won't have to be captured in those measurements, and you can find that in the section here. So with that, we have reached the last part of our training, which will focus on the record keeping and reporting requirements for composting and in-vessel activities. So as I mentioned before, 1383 added new record keeping and reporting requirements to the existing compost and in-vessel digestion regulations. So in this list, you might see some of the existing regulations, as well as what's been added resulting from 1383. So what we want to capture overall with these record keeping requirements is the daily incoming weights by material type, the daily outgoing weights of material sent to disposal, the daily outgoing weights of compost, the daily outgoing weights of chip and ground material produced, the weight of compostable material that's sent off-site to any destination other than a permitted solid waste facility or operation, and the quarterly percentage of organic waste that's in material sent for disposal. And that number right there is what's going to be calculated based on those measurements being performed. So how that percentage is determined is going to be based on the overall 10-day measurement period for those samples that are captured. It's going to take the sum of organics and material sent for disposal in that 10-day period, and it's going to divide it by the sum of all material that's sent for disposal in that same 10-day period. It gets multiplied by 100, and that's what gives us the overall percentage of that organic waste that's being disposed. And that's what ultimately is going to be reported through RDRS, and we're going to show an example in the next few slides. So with this example, we're going to determine the total weight of organics disposed for a single day in their 10-day window, and then incorporate that into RDRS in an overall quarterly percentage. So what a daily sample would look like in this case is we take all material destined for disposal that was sent off site that day, which in this example is 3 tons. And of that material, we took a representative sample, and it has to be at least 200 pounds. So in this case, it's 208.3 pounds. Next, we would remove any organic material from that sample and weigh the amount of organics. So in this case, we have an organic weight of 152 pounds and a weight of non-organic material of 56.3 pounds. So in order to get the organic ratio that we need, we take the 152 pounds of organic waste and we divide it by that total weight of 208.3 pounds. We multiply it by 100, and that gives us an organic ratio of 0.73. What we can do now with that ratio is multiply that by the 3 tons that we sent off site that day, and we now get a total of 2.19 tons of disposed organics. And that tells us of that 3 tons that we sent for disposal, 2.19 of it is actually organic. And that's what we're going to take for our daily weight and ultimately get a total to determine that quarterly percentage. So using that daily total and the rest of these totals that we have in this example, we can now determine the quarterly percentage of organics that were disposed. So what we need to start with is taking the total weight of organics that were disposed, and this is the actual organics based on those samples being taken. So of those 4 samples, the total comes out to 8.6 for total weights of organics disposed. And we divide that by the total weight of material that was sent off-site for disposal, which is 10.8. So by dividing 8.6 into 10.8 and multiplying that by 100, we get a percentage of 79.6. So this is our quarterly percentage of organics that were disposed for this specific 10-day operating period. And this is what the operator would report through RDRS for that reporting period. This concludes our training on the solid waste facility requirements. For all of the guidance that we referenced, as well as additional guidance, please visit our CalRecycle regulation implementation webpage. If you have any feedback or questions on this video, or if you have any ideas for future guidance, please contact the Training and Assistance team at permittrainingassistance@calrecycle.ca.gov. Thanks so much for watching.